part of my chapters. And what that means is that I started out as a teacher, later as a principal in alternative high schools, and then became kind of an education consultant. I'm not even going to try to explain that because it would take way too much time, whatever that means. But I've worked nationally with different school districts, et cetera. I've even coached baseball recently at Jefferson High School, which is kind of beside the point, but a lot of fun. And my passion has always been young people defined as anywhere from basically diapers through college and into adult basic education that I've also taught in my life. So the reason that I'm so passionate about this particular topic and being here today is because of my stake in what happens to young people in this country that I feel personally responsible for in a way that's difficult to explain, the same way that I do for my grandchildren, who I followed here to Portland. So Andrew, you can go to the next. Okay, for some reason it says it doesn't matter. It says this meeting is being recorded. Great. In the middle of my screen, doesn't matter. So, first of all, when I read this quote, which I like, obviously, I have taken the liberty of changing a couple of words and phrases here. So what I now have is the following: the future belongs to all of us who believe in our collective dreams. And I'm not going to say more about it other than the fact that I totally believe to my core of my soul that if we are going to be successful, it's going to have to be a we in the big picture. That this is just obviously so huge that it requires the collective progressive community, however we define progressives. So you can go to the next. And the objectives for today. Let's see if I can get rid of this thing over here. Sorry. Oh, there you go. Put it up here in the corner, someplace where no one cares. There you go. So it's really as simple or as complex as the following. I have a proposal today to present. So this is not kind of informational, although hopefully this will provide some good discussion. So today, right here, right now, I want to present the idea for piloting a series. And I'm not sure whether to call it a series, a study group, what, that doesn't really matter. Focus mainly, but not exclusively, on young activists. And we can talk later about how do you define a young activist. I want to, as Barbara said, give you a chance to kind of walk through a little bit one of the sample activities / curriculum. And most important, I want your feedback, not so much about all of the details, unless you think some of them are showstoppers, but more, does this idea make sense? And would you be interested in helping, essentially? So those are really the objectives for today. And Andrew, you can go to the next. So again, as a way of kind of setting the stage here, this headline, which I made up, not surprising, I just wanted to be clear that I didn't get this from the headline of the New York Times or something like that, is really focusing on a couple of key pieces. One, again, is the urgency. But with the urgency, there's this kind of dichotomy of the warning signs and the pitfalls that are out there. And in a simple way, I think of the pitfalls as being ways to move from the we and the our to one person and one group against the other. And that would certainly include, and why I call this out, even though it's controversial to some degree, the defense of white skin privilege. And frankly, that discussion about white skin privilege could take 5 hours or more. So my purpose is not to get into a discussion about the definition of that, but rather to say that the issue of race and skin color, along with class, in my opinion, is the driving force today that the power brokers are using to divide us up. So you can go on and advance. Thanks. Doing a great job, Andrew. So and by the way, if you have any, I forgot to say this before, if you have any clarifying questions as I'm talking, it's fine. You know, we have the benefit, I suppose, of having relatively not a huge number of people here today. So at any point you can ask your question. If it's a more discussion-like question, save it and you can put it in the chat, because we are going to have 20 minutes of discussion time later towards the end, not even in that long. So the stakes are sky high. And again, I'm not going to read each one of these, but to me, they're scary, including is some form of maybe nouveau fascism in this country possible. Even without that, you know, the day-to-day pressure that people are being put under, from working class people, African Americans, Latinos, immigrants, LGBT, the list goes on and on. And all of us in general, and those groups in particular, are feeling the pain every day. So it's not an intellectual discussion about, is it time to act? So you can go on to the next. So what is the basic proposal that I'm making? So again, it's both complex and straightforward. So the basic idea is launch locally driven, and again, I don't know what to call it, study groups. I've been in a couple of study groups in my life. Maybe that's not what it should be called, activist groups, but they would be groups of maybe, you know, probably no more than 10 people, maybe more than that, who would be recruited, which goes to the next point, from existing organizations. So that's, for this to work, there is no way this is going to work as, you know, Ephraim has an idea and he's going to start this somehow. I can't do it. I don't want to do it. There's no way it can happen. This would need to be something that was taken over, essentially owned by existing organizations throughout the Pacific Northwest as a starting point. Or maybe if that's too big, in a particular city like Portland or Seattle, I don't know, or in BC. So anyway, the idea would be, as one trying to do today, would be brought to the attention of those who have a stake in those organizations to be part of the planning process. And if they were happy with the planning process and what the product seemed to be, then they would help recruit people from their spheres of influence. I hope that makes sense. And I'll go a little deeper into that in the next slide. Were there any immediate questions about that? Because that's pretty important. Okay. So what does the it look like? And as a teacher, as an educator, and I've written a lot of curriculum in my life also, not necessarily activist curriculum, but certainly social studies curriculum that was activist curriculum for young people. I have found that, in my experience at least, the most successful approach is to frame important themes for people. So what are the big ideas? And from that, to then drill down with more detail within each of the themes. So here's an example. And there's 4 to 6 more of these, and I put actually some of these ideas in at the end of the slide show as the appendix. We're not going to go into it today, but it's there. So the big topic is American depressions and recessions. I've noted the 3, and I can't quite, I'm going to get rid of this thing over here. Let me see this. Get rid of my picture for a second. Yeah. So those 3 events are pretty huge, even though you might argue with the dates and why I picked those. 1929 is pretty obvious, the Great Depression. 2008 is a big leap from 1929, but it does kind of focus on a seminal moment in our country, which was the near complete economic meltdown of our system and then to 2019, which obviously we're still in, meaning the combination of the economic devastation and other devastation brought on by the pandemic, or assisted by the pandemic. So, as an example, that would be a theme, and under the theme, there would be many, many resources potentially, not too many, but enough to really dig deep. And these resources could be articles, videos, even other types of resources that folks I'm sure are familiar with as possibilities. For this particular example or sampling, I would like you to take about 3 minutes to read this article, which Andrew is going to post or give you a link to. And I'm gonna keep track of time. I think we're doing pretty well for time actually, despite the fact that we got started late. So when Andrew posts these, I would like you to look at it. But first, for a second, Andrew, can you go to the study questions first so people can see those to help there? Thanks. So you don't have to deal with these one by one once you've read this, but you can. What is implied about our economic system by the provocative points, sometimes recessions help. What are the long-term, pretty important consequences of cyclical unemployment for individuals, groups, etc.? And most importantly, how might we use lessons such as this from the past to organize today? And I just want to highlight that because unless this would spark action today and a next step, it's not really worth the time, because this is not meant to be a college seminar class, which I think you get. So I am going to basically give you some quiet time now, about 3 minutes. You can chat or anything that works for you if you're not able to get into the article, but let's read that and keep in mind these 3 kind of focus questions. Okay. So I assume the folks can still hear me. In the chat, it was asked, is this just a bullet point? And there's a whole article here. Whole, it's 3 pages. Okay, we found it, great. And I should have said this before, you don't have to bother with the graphs unless you're a graph person, because the points are made through the narrative just as well, maybe better. How about a 1-minute warning? Okay, hope that was enough time for folks. I think some of the bullet points obviously highlight what it is, the article. So let's open it up right now. And again, there's no answer that I have written down. I mean, I have my own opinions. So let's have a discussion about this, and you can start any place you would like, and there's no particular protocol here. So you can answer one of the questions first. You can do a combination of them. But essentially, what are kind of, what's your initial takeaway from this article? And we're just going to do it again. I think we have a relatively small group of maybe 10 people. So we can just kind of talk conversationally. So anyone who wants to speak, the floor is yours now.
Well, I have some thoughts.
Great.
As a millennial who lived through the 2008 recession, and I'm actually a PhD student in history too at the University of Washington, and I'm writing a dissertation right now on the history of Seattle's deep recession of the 1970s, when the Boeing company nearly went bankrupt, and how people in the city responded to the recession. And my argument being that the ways that the city responded to the recession led to the kind of the unequal kind of tech, white collar professional economy that Seattle's known for today. So, I mean, I think a lot about recessions all the time. And the thing that the takeaway from the article that you've shared and some of your questions for me is that at least in the economic system that we live under right now, under capitalism, recessions and crisis are a normal feature. There's something that happened, once a decade or more, and the lesson for activists is I take away is that activists need to be prepared. I mean, we need a social safety net, obviously, for times when the economy goes bad, but we also need to be prepared politically for some of the openings that crisis creates. I don't follow probably not local, but current events as much as I should. But I understand that the Biden administration's in their economic program that people have been pushing for a long time, progressive things that having to do with state money, and putting more money into the economy from the government. And I would attribute that partly, that progressive move partly to the crisis that we've just lived through with the pandemic. I think, and whether it was a pandemic or just a normal economic crisis, I think they were likely to happen under the economic system that we live in. And if people are prepared, if people have policy, solutions ready to go when there's a crisis, and crises, I think by definition, are moments when people don't know what to do and that the old answers are no longer working. They provide opportunities for activists. So that's my take. Anyway.
Great, thanks. Mm-hmm. Great share. Anyone jump in?
I'll follow up on that. I think Andrew's point about how predictable this is an important one, and we're always told that these economic crises are kind of who could have known, and yet it's a natural consequence of capitalism and inevitable. And perhaps the gaps between one to another is a little shorter or a little longer, but it's always going to happen under the current system. And so one of the impacts is the multi-generational impact. So, I live in Canada, so we never had redlining. We've had all sorts of other forms of structural racism, but it's really struck me how when redlining was first introduced in the US, that it by design disenfranchised economically like huge numbers of people who have never had the opportunity except for sort of those few fortunate ones who were able to break out of the structure to be able to now, how many generations later are we going to be looking at folks just being pushed over to the edge or on the wrong side of a red line? So those are the kinds of things that jumped out at me as I was thinking about it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Who else?
This is Everard. The first question there, I think, really sort of stuck out to me. I think the implications of it are really fascinating. What is implied by our economic system by the provocative point that sometimes recessions help? In reading the article, what it really seems to say is if people are sometimes thinking that recessions help, it's really for one of two reasons. One is if they are hoping that this can damage their political opponent somehow, but generally it seems to be the sort of the half ironic point of sometimes recessions help. It's like, well, maybe this will like drive down housing prices. But the only reason why that is a point to be made at all is because of the economic system. People find it difficult to live as it is, how it functions normally. So the entire idea of like a recession helping is only because things are already so broken that it really can't get that much worse. So maybe if everything gets worse, maybe something will get marginally better. And of course, it really doesn't. It just makes things worse across the board for everybody. It's just a sign of how dysfunctional things are, even when it's supposed to be functioning, quote unquote, well. Well for who? That's the real question. So I thought that was a really interesting point.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Well, I just wanted to add, and this will be my last comment, but Joey's comment about it being a intergenerational or multi-generational thing really spoke to me, because these things have happened in the past, and people don't need to understand that each crisis is not necessarily new, that it's building on crises of the past and how people have responded to them, and that occurs over generations. The structure, there's structural investments and institutional changes that we make, that we live with, and that are there for us in the next crisis, and we live with the inequalities that are baked into them. So yeah, thank you, Joey.
Yeah, and we can keep going with the discussion. I just wanted to react to all the comments, basically, because there's a common thread, I think, across them. And I'm thinking from the standpoint of, as the teacher in me, if I were facilitating, not teaching, facilitating a group of people, young, old, in the middle, I would be thinking, as I am right now, about how do we kind of raise up these questions and crystallize them so they become right in front of us, so we can consider all the possibilities. And I was kind of scribbling, as you may have seen, scribbling down a couple of points over here. But one, the one is obviously the fact that recessions are not an accident and do not come about every once in a while. There's a regular part baked into our system. So that's number one. Another point, which is kind of the flip side of that in a positive way, which is be ready on our side as organizers for crises. It doesn't mean you're rooting for a crisis. It means that it's going to come at some point. So bake that into your strategy. And that was connected to what Joey said about it's so predictable, inevitable, and the multi-generational impact, which really hit me and hits me, because if you were to think about it from the perspective of, you're, I don't know, relatively young, whatever that means. So you're 25 years old, and you've lived through, if you're 25, you've lived through, you may not remember 2008 exactly, but you certainly are experiencing and know what 2019 is like. So you might be thinking, "Oof, yeah, that's over." Right? What hell that was. Couldn't do all these different things, lost my job, all of the different consequences. So the point here, if this is to work and activate people to take action, is, you know what? It's going to happen again. Maybe not the pandemic, maybe not this virus, maybe not the financial meltdown of the system, but it is going to happen again because it is part of the structure of, as to use the C word, capitalism. But whether we call it capitalism or call it spaghetti, you know, because it doesn't matter in some ways, the right wing loves to say, oh, that's capitalism or that's communism. You know, so the point here is, what's the reality of the system? And I think, yeah, the last thing I'm going to say over here is the point that was made by, is it Eviat? Is that how to pronounce it? I botched that? The first name, Eviat? I hope so.
It's Evrart.
Evrart.
E-V-R-A-R-T.
Well, I did a good job of botching it then. Apologies, Evrart.
No worries.
So that Evrart made is the, you know, kind of damning comment that we're living in a dysfunctional system. Dysfunction kind of goes beyond just, well, it's cyclical, it happens a lot. Dysfunction means that it almost never works because it doesn't. So I just want to kind of now move on, and this was hopefully to give you a little feel for how this might go. But imagine again that you or someone else locally is a facilitator of this, and what you have at your disposal would be this and other articles. You would have the framework of the curriculum with all of the study questions and resources there. So you don't have to do a whole lot of preparation other than you becoming familiar with what the issues are in the resource and the overall frame. Okay. So with that said, I want to go on. I'm aware of the time and want to honor that. So let's go to the next slide. So I want to use really pivot over here and now use our remaining time. How much time do we have, Barbara, left?
About 20 minutes, a little under 20 minutes.
Okay, so we did pretty well. I was worried that there would be not enough time to finish. So that's going to mean either we have enough time to talk about the practicality of this, or you can just kind of think about it and react and then have 5 minutes for a coffee break before you go into the next session. So details for launching the initiative. You can go to the next one. So, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time here because I don't want to confuse you. I want to be clear. I don't want to confuse myself. So here are the details, and I'm going to talk about here what it is, but also as importantly, what it's not, what the proposal is not. Okay. So if we were to launch this series, there are questions of balance, which is to what degree statement. So number one, my experience with curriculum and this kind of work is that you need to really carefully balance flexibility of whoever's participating with enough guidance so that whoever you're asking to facilitate is not like left out in the woods. No pun intended. Actually, there was a pun intended a little bit. So that is key. You know, if I were facilitating this and I've been in that position, I don't want to have a blank slate, a blank page. I also don't want to be told A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K in terms of what you do. It needs to find that balance. Second, led by local volunteers and rotating facilitators. I think that that's key for a number of reasons. One is the alternative to that is you would have hired paid facilitators. The other implication would be that you would be parachuting in someone that the community might not know. And there are other implications as well. So the idea here would be whatever groups are set up through the help of the initiative, you know, what that's going to look like in terms of the organization. As part of recruiting people, we would also identify and recruit facilitators, possibly from that organization, who know the people and participants and are comfortable doing this. Third, that it would be offered both online and in person. The idea is to make it as accessible and flexible as possible. There are advantages and disadvantages to each. And I just wanted to add over here that some of the inspiration for me is from really having done this pretty recently during the pandemic with my partner in crime who's lives here in Portland, where she recruited me to help teach a citizenship class or classes for new arrivals. And I had no idea what it was going to be. And I was given this curriculum that was developed by the US government, which is a kind of standalone, here it is, which, as you might expect, is not the greatest curriculum ever written, but it is what it is. So I was given the task of building on it and expanding. And my experience, frankly, was eye-opening. I mean, I wanted to do this just to kind of give back, you know, that phrase. And I ended up loving it because the reaction of, and it was only 4 people from different countries, Somalia, et cetera, was so incredible in terms of, you mean to tell me? That was kind of their reaction. It wasn't just, I need to memorize the 13 colonies. It was, you mean to tell me that when the Constitution was written, women were not given equal rights, or African Americans or Indians? And that went on throughout the 2 months of the sessions. So that really inspired me. And I actually said to my partner who grew into this, Lisa, what do you think about this? So she and I kind of noodled on it for a while. And that's, long story short, how I got here today with the great assistance from a bunch of people, including Barbara. And the last one is, again, I think I've talked about this already. For this to work, it has to be basically taken on, not in terms of, organizations are incredibly busy. I understand that as someone who's been part of organizations. So it's not at all that. It's not, hey, here it is, go run with this and, you know, have a great time and just kind of add it to your list. No, it is instead, your job would basically be to identify or put the word out and help organize folks who participate the same way a new arrivals class for immigration is organized by the local organizations. And then once you have that, whoever we is, the central committee, the organization, which would hopefully be very non-central committee-like, would work with that site to make it happen, including training lightly the facilitator who be identified, giving them the curriculum, all of which is in the era of online is easy enough to do. So that is the basic hot mid-level details. There's a lot more detail below this that we could talk about that we probably don't have a lot of time to talk about now. But each of these 4 together, I believe, are critical because it makes it actionable and as part of the DNA of existing organizations. The result of all of this hopefully would be, if I'm the executive director, I have some role in organizing an organization ABC, and I have these 10 people go through this study group experience, I'm hoping that the result is that some of these folks are going to be hypo-charged and will want to take on more than they had before because they're inspired by the dreams and the possibility. Now, would that happen for everyone? Be thrilled. I've never seen it. You know, if it happens for 3 or 4 of the 10, that would be a tremendous success because then we're adding to the role of activists who are out there. And I'm talking about activists, not just someone who will show up at a rally, but someone who can start taking a lead, which is critical, I believe, in terms of making our field more diverse and more inclusive of where the voices really need to come from, whether it's by age, by sex, by race, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm gonna catch my breath and ask any questions about this, any immediate thoughts? Does this seem like, you know, is there anything here that you kind of, or in total, does it seem like, you know, I could see this working? Or in total, does it seem like, Not quite sure. So the last slide over here is, drum roll. So what do you think? And if you think it's worth being part of, these are the 4 possible ways that anyone could play a role. Because we're not, the proposal today is not, okay, we're starting on Monday. Give me the names. That's obviously not the proposal. The proposal is to decide if this is an efficacious idea. And if it is, then to help develop the next steps and then to try to pilot it. So thank you for listening. And I really want, in whatever time we have now, and I'm going to turn this over to Barbara to moderate this last part, because we're kind of landing the plane, but I hope that as we land the plane, that we have some volunteers who want to get back on board. So Barbara, I'm going to turn the baton back to you.
Okay, so we've got about 10, 12 minutes to go. And I guess Effie's asking not so much about the curriculum, because we haven't seen enough of that probably to really tell. But is this the way to reach young people, young workers in our community, whatever community you all happen to be from, with this work? Is this worth putting some time into? And then how might you see it rolling out? One of the things that he and I talked about when we first talked was, well, what organizations are you talking about that would have young workers that would want to pursue this? And as I thought about it, it turned out to be a pretty short list in Portland anyway. So curious what you all think. Joey.
Yeah, I think that there's great potential. I have a couple of comments. I guess one is, I think make it really simple and let people explore their own stuff. So, I think you could burn yourself out, or whoever is part of the curriculum development group, to really overload with so many resources that you're really having, and the idea of trying to keep it timely. It could be kind of framed back to, here are some things to explore and go collect, but with a critical eye. And so what do you come back with? I also have, and Barbara knows this because Barbara and I are very old friends. I've been involved with the labor movement in Canada for over 40 years. And I can't tell you how many conferences I've gone to where people end the conference by saying, what we need is more education for young people. And if we could just legislate that, then everything would be solved. And I've never felt like education comes first for people to be inspired to get themselves to become involved in learning more about these things. I think it's the activist piece that comes first, where somebody is invited to tag along at a rally or happens to be involved on a picket line, or, so where do we actually invite people into the movement, in which case they then want to know more about why are we here and what does this attach to. And so I would think that your curriculum might benefit from those in between session stuff that is an assignment. Go out and find something that's going on in your community, because almost every community has something. In the environmental movement, the crisis of climate, the labor movement, there's got to be something going on, or a community event that may be a celebration. But then have a bit of an analysis. What was this? Why was this? What purpose does it serve? Did it achieve its purpose? What did you as an observer note that maybe the organizers didn't? All those kinds of questions that people could come back and debate. I'm also really curious if it would be intended as a cohort from within an organization or multi-organizations. The labor adult education I've done has really benefited from having people come from a variety of different unions, where there's this whole experience of, oh, the way my union does it isn't the only way, and what you're saying is really interesting and provocative to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there's a lot of opportunity, just like we've seen in the popularity of book clubs among adults, is for people to have this as a combination of a place to nurture their own thinking and activism, but also a social base that sometimes people are very isolated, particularly if they're a little bit on the edge of the thinking of their own organization, to have a place to take that thinking. What I would also caution you against is what I grew up in the 70s was what I call the Marxist boys clubs, which were, it was great for the guys who were sitting there drinking beer and hashing this stuff out over hours, but it wasn't so great for the women who were expected to do the dishes and bring those beers over to them.
Yeah.
Thank you, Joy.
Great close.
Yeah. Anybody else got any thoughts about this? I'm not even sure. I know where some of you are from, but most of you I don't know.
I have a thought about right now you've got kind of the contrast between people, up in arms about critical race theory. So that I don't really think that that's going to be very helpful. But at the same time, everybody, every corporation, let's say, is, oh yes, I'm definitely for diversity. And something that, is just like, it was kind of a blind spot for me until the last couple of years or whatever, is that it was like, where are the women, where are the African Americans, where are the Asians? Well, you guys have access to, these folks were heroes. There are all kinds of heroic characters that are not being covered in business programs, or not being covered in public schools or whatever. And so that it might be that, kind of reaching out to the education curriculum in general in the public schools to get more of these minority characters into the curriculum as heroes, rather than, as Diane Ravish is education person that talks about, the great white heroes. There's lots of non-male white heroes out there that ought to be in the curriculum that have been ignored.
Good thoughts. Thanks, Luella. Other folks.
My main thought about this is that what you're proposing is something that's already being done by a lot of organizations. And one being the organization that I work for. In addition to being a PhD student, I'm the assistant director of the Harry Bridges Center for Labor Studies at the University of Washington. And this year we launched our first ever internship for University of Washington students. And they're the folks that you seem to be trying to involve in this project. Mostly people under 25 who are young workers themselves, and who've been activated by movements of the time, whether that's the struggles around the pandemic or the Black Lives Matter movement. And we recruited about 8 students that worked in different organizations, labor organizations around the Seattle area. And we had the meeting once a week around a curriculum to talk about current events and to talk about, we had some readings. We did a reading, the race and labor curriculum that Bill Fletcher did. We had the students read that. There's a booklet or zine that Bill Fletcher helped put together for the State Labor Council. We had guest speakers come, people who mostly different generations of organizers, people who've been doing it for decades, people who've been doing it for, not as long as that, just different stages of organizing experience. And the students really they really engaged with it. They really, I think that we had really great feedback about the whole experience. And we did essentially what you're outlining. We had a curriculum and recruited, students and everything like that. The thing that was a difference maker, I think, for the students and is very important, is that we compensated the students. It was a paid internship, and the students were paid to have the time to sit and have these conversations and to reflect on the work that they were doing. And they're also paid for hours they did with the host organizations. But they were paid also just to come and meet and visit with their students and do the curriculum with us. And that was a difference maker for most students. That meant that they could you know, they didn't have to devote time to a paid job, or they could take some time from, you know, so that was important. And I know it's not possible to pay everybody for these kinds of experiences, but providing some sort of incentive like that is important. There's also community organizations in the Seattle area that do this. There's one called Puget Sound Sage that recruits people from the community, mostly people from communities of color, who go through a curriculum like this with the goal of being eventually either running for a local office or being put on local commissions and boards. They do essentially what you're describing. They go through a curriculum where they learn about the history of their communities. They learn about the institutions in the city, and then they get with the goal of then taking a leadership role in those. The name of that program escapes me, but the organization's Puget Sound Sage, and they've done this for a number of years. They call it an institute. I think it's a Community Education Institute or something like that. So yeah, I think this program you've outlined is really great. I would encourage you to look at what else is out there and how people have done it and are doing it. I find it a great model for organizing with young people in my day-to-day job. So thank you.
So I just want to build on that. I know we're running out of time over here, to say that Andrew's comment is exactly where I think the next step, where we need to kind of focus here. The we meaning anyone who's game, you know, because talking to Ephraim is probably not going to gain a lot of steam at this point. So with other folks that are doing this, whether it's in Puget Sound, wherever, and other folks that might like to do it and have questions about it, I think that would be really the next kind of step, is let's kind of get a group of willing, not people to commit to necessarily doing this, but to take it the next step, including to bring to the table what those resources are, so that we can answer the question, well, is there enough, or is there a strategic gap out there that could be closed to a certain degree, you know, by kind of adding this, you know, fuel to the proverbial fire. So I'm going to leave it there and turn it back to you, Barbara, to shut us down.
Yeah, I want to make one quick comment, and that's that the availability of resources like the terrific ones that Andrew's describing varies a lot from community to community. And there's a lot fewer in Portland, and probably way a lot fewer in more rural parts of both Oregon and Washington, and probably BC as well. So I think this can't be a one size fits all. But Effie, thank you so much. I put Effie's email address into the chat. And if you want to follow up with him, if you're interested in knowing more, want to see if he can talk you into helping out one-on-one. I know he'd be happy to hear from you. So thank you all very much. Andrew, is there a slide about what's coming up next here?
Yeah, there is. I can share it. Just
Okay.
One second.
I do know while he's doing that the next round of workshops starts at 1:15. So you've got a few minutes to catch your breath. And can we all just thank Effie for all the work he's put into this and the time and spending that time with us. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
We
for participating.
really appreciated the discussion.
Great.
Thanks, Karen. Where are you? Are you in Washington?
I work in Washington, and I work at SPIA, the Aerospace Professional.
Oh,
Labor
cool. Okay, so thank you very much, everybody. Here comes the slide.
Oh, where did
Nope,
it go?
the slide went
Sorry.
away. But you can go to your program,
Yes.
that the link in the chat box that from this morning, and find out where the next workshops are, and hopefully there won't be a technical glitch.
Yeah, I think I've been texting with some of the conference organizers. I think the problems have been fixed, so you can feel safe clicking on the next link for the next program. But yeah, I would
Okay.
go back to the original program. I think that's where you'll get the most information about what's up next.
Yeah, thank you. And Andrew, thanks for all your technical help.
Of course.
Thanks everybody for being here.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
Andrew
Ephraim.
and Barbara.
Bye.
right. Take care.